Greetings! Today's book haul-ish is all about the Brisbane Lifeline bookfest, as you will have seen on the thumbnail and the title. Now, unlike what the thumbnail would suggest, I didn't actually purchase 1,500,000 copies of 50 Shades of Grey. The one I read many years ago was quite enough. I'm not doing that again. The Lifeline Book Fair is an institution for me and friends in Brisbane. Even before I lived in Brisbane, I'd come down for it sometime. It's a charity organisation that raises money for a 24/7, that is a 24 hours a day, helpline for anyone in need of counselling, who is having depressed thoughts and needs someone to talk to. So it's a really, really good cause. It's a good charity event. And it is the premier way of getting second-hand books on the ground in Queensland. At least it's my premier way of getting them. Now, I ended up with quite a few books, and I'm not doing them all today. You can see part of them behind me, which I'm still processing. But the ones on the table today are all specifically duplicates that I'm going to be talking about. With the Lifeline Book Fair, like I say, I've been going for years, and it takes up several halls of the exhibition centre, and typically it has a high quality section where the prices are going to be on the book, typically a sticker on the back, and then you've got the low quality section. I seem to remember that the first time I went to the Brisbane Lifeline Book Fest, the low quality section was $1 per book. It's now $2.50 per book, and instead of having 3 sections, we've only got the 2. Now, last time I went to it, I ended up a little bit disappointed. I'd gone with the intention of filling my boots, as Jules Burt says, with a whole heap of wonderful classic science fiction and fantasy. And that was not at all the case. That was not what happened. That time, for the first time, I felt financially willing to invest in the high quality books. So I went straight to the high quality section. And the science fiction section there was very, very disappointing. It was mainly romantasy, let's be honest. There was very little that you'd consider science fiction. And when I finally got around to going over and having a look at the low quality section, there was nothing there. There's only ever a very small amount of science fiction and fantasy, and once it's gone from the low section, it's gone. It didn't get replenished, so it was very disappointing. I still got a lot of books. I always get a lot of books, but they weren't classic science fiction and fantasy. So my expectations from this event were low. In fact, what I was aiming for was a lot of, if not a lot, literature and classics. There's quite a few that I've been on the lookout for, and I thought if I found them, I'd get them. And a few key differences that may be important to other people who may go to this event one day. I went straight for the low quality section. That was always my plan in the earlier days when I didn't have as much money. It's like I would be annoyed if I went to the high quality section and then went to the low quality section and found something there cheaper, because I'm not a collector. I'm turning into a collector, but at heart I am a reader. And a low quality book seemed just as good as a high quality one. This time I went back to my roots, as it were, and started off in the low quality section. And because I got there early, I was, if not the first through the doors, I was the first one through my door. And that meant that I was the first in the tiny classic science fiction and fantasy section. And I was gobsmacked. There was so much there. All the classic type things that many of us on this channel love that are still being processed back there. But there was heaps. There was absolutely heaps. And I did indeed fill my boots almost completely in the classic science fiction section. And I did get quite a bit from the literature as well, which I'll show in a subsequent video. But today is all about the replicas. So, as someone who reads and not collects, I've always felt a bit bad about getting a book that I already have, but there are some exceptions to this. There comes a point when a book is so completely wrecked and so completely divorced from its covers, and occasionally its pages are divorced from each other, that it becomes a good idea to buy a new copy, which is how I have rebought The Fire Sword by Adrienne Martine Barnes. Adrienne Martine Barnes wrote this spectacular fantasy book. It is from the 80s, if I remember correctly, but it was still one of the best fantasy books that I had read at the time. Yes, 1984. It's the first in 4 books. The Fire Sword, then there's a Crystal Sword, there's a whole heap of swords. One sword after the other. I've only read one other of the other books, but I've never found the others. This is a book that I loved so much, and I kept on rereading it until the last time I went to want to reread it a couple of years ago. I picked it up. This happened, and I put it down again carefully because I didn't want to totally destroy it. I have now upgraded. I have this nice copy. It is the trope of a woman going back in time to a land that is her historical land. But this particular woman, Eleanor, is actually quite savvy about the history of her land, and she knows that this England is not her England. This is another England, which they call Albion, and the king has got a different name. The Crusades never happened. And there's this battle between light and dark happening in the land of Albion. And Eleanor, just by being there, has become a significant part of it. It was a cracking good story. Very heavy in the Celtic mythology and history involved in it. And I really loved that, because at that stage, I hadn't met a whole lot of epic fantasy that used a lot of Celtic stuff. It's popular now, but when I read this, I hadn't seen too many of them. So I'm delighted to upgrade The Fire Sword by Adrienne Martine Barnes. Earlier in the year, I was reading Gerald Durrell. I had to borrow the Corfu trilogy from the library in order to complete it, because while I have 2 copies of My Family of Other Animals, Birds, Beasts and Relatives, my copy has vanished in time. I used to have a cute little paperback with a photo of Sally the donkey on the front, but I've always loved the image that we have on this hardcover. You've got a very pretty painting that's clearly Gerald himself, or Jerry, and his donkey Sally on the island of Corfu. The jacket design is by Eileen Walton, and while I wouldn't normally have engaged with a hardcover, it was $2.50. I couldn't resist. And I also think it's a first printing from 1969. There's some yellowing of the cover. It's old. There's some staining and fading. But I'm really happy to have Birds, Beasts and Relatives again. What else? Okay, we're going to go with John Christopher. The Tripods trilogy. At least a few of you out there watching will know the Tripods trilogy. It was this brilliant kids series, television series, and it started off with John Christopher writing the Tripods, starting with The White Mountains. Okay, so with this trilogy, by the way, the first one is a slightly later edition than the first 2. The first 2 are a bit older, I think 2 years older, and they've got wraparounds. They do an interesting thing too. So The White Mountain is the Tripods trilogy number 1, and it's got this great cover. All the covers that I own are by Chris Moore. Then with Tripods number 2, The City of Gold and Lead, you've got a different cover. It's excellent, but then you go to a wraparound, and on the back you actually have an image from the cover from number 1. It's quite clever, really. I like it. And then you go on to number 3, The Pool of Fire. It's got that spectacular hot air balloon and a tripod in the background. And the wraparound takes us back to the cover from the second book. It's really quite clever, and I like it. Now, I never saw the Tripods trilogy until I was an adult, when someone I knew introduced me to it. It's a really good kids science fiction series, and the books are very good as well. John Christopher writes well. I like his writing. And I reread them a couple of years after I'd first I read them for the first time, I suspect, as a trilogy, though I think I'd read an isolated one in the past. I read them after having watched the TV series. Really, really great. You don't have to be a kid to enjoy the tripods. The tripods are very alien invaders of a similar theme, I feel, to The War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, but adapted for children. Anyway, great series. If you don't know it, introduce yourselves. So those books that collapse, John Myers wrote The Harp and the Blade, which is a fantasy of Druidic England. Once again, England, history fantasy or fantasy history. I got this book in the 80s as well, or probably around about the time as The Fire Sword, and I loved it so much. It was already 15th hand or so when I got it. I've never actually seen the back cover before because I'd never had the back cover. I went looking for it on my shelves to pull it out and show you. I can't find it, but that could simply be because the spine was so completely gone. The front cover was so eroded that the edges were completely gone as well, and it certainly didn't hang together as nicely as this. Now that I've got this replacement copy, which I'm very excited about, I might actually reread it, because previously I was terrified every time I picked it up. Look, the pages are actually attached to the spine. That's so exciting. Which is the same excitement I get over this one. The World of Susie Wong by Richard Mason. This is not science fiction by any stretch of the imagination. This is a book that I've owned, I think, since the 90s, reading and rereading. It's really interesting. It is set in Hong Kong, and our protagonist, who is a white European, comes into contact with Susie Wong and begins a relationship with her. Now, Susie Wong, when she first meets him, manages to convince him that she's a innocent young girl, and by the time he's got an emotive tie with her, he finds out that she's been a prostitute for a few years. Since she was 16? Or is she 16 now? I can't remember. She's young. There's probably a lot of content warnings for the modern 2000s reader, but when I read it, it did some things really, really well that I hadn't encountered in books before. I'd read other books set in Asia, but I hadn't really read a book that went into the power inequality and the lack of balance between Asia and first world and the European or first world countries. I hadn't really read one that truly highlighted the significant difference and the impact that was made on many women like Susie Wong. So this book takes us through the bars where the prostitutes hang out and introduces us to their particular subcultures and a whole heap of girls. And one of the things that I really loved about this was the voice of Susie Wong. It sounds like someone who is not an English speaker speaking English, and someone who comes from a culture with very different, broader outlines talking to someone from ours. Again, this may have aged badly, but it really opened my eyes to looking upon the relationship between Asia, a country that has had so many wars that are mostly, let's face it, triggered by Europeans, like the American War, as the Vietnamese call the Vietnamese War. It opened my eyes to seeing these things from a different perspective, which was really, really good. Now, I've had this single copy, which I haven't been able to find. I think I finally threw it away a few months ago. The cover was not connected. The pages were not connected. The first third of the book, not a single one of those pages was actually connected to the spine. I held it together with a rubber band. And the last time I read it, it was like reading an antique document. You'd pick up a page and turn it over. You'd pick up the next page, read it, and turn it over. And I think I finally decided the book had to go when it lost a couple of pages. So I've got a replacement book from the Lifeline book fair that I'm very happy about. And now I can reread that one if I want to. Okay, on a tone of some levity, I came across the sticky history book of Vikings, longships, and battle axes. I can't even tell you why I like this so much. Sure, I'm in a historical interest group that concentrates on the Viking era, but we certainly don't have helmets with horns on it. And it is cartoony and it is funny, and yet I really like the illustrations. I haven't read it yet. I'm expecting to find it hysterical and annoying and funny. The other thing it has is it has these pages of stickers, because apparently Vikings are better with stickers. And I don't know who decided we needed a whole page of stickers that are basically strange brown lumps of, maybe it's bread, maybe it's chickens, maybe it's just strange brown lumps. But anyway, someone decided that that was required. And this is a Scholastic book, I think. No, it's not. It's a Henderson Publishing, Woodridge, Suffolk, and it was originally sold in England for £3.99. I just think it is spectacularly funny. I think I will enjoy reading it without taking it seriously. This is kind of a replacement, kind of not. J.G. Ballard's The Drowned World, which I read, I think last year, I'm not sure, thoroughly enjoyed. I'd been looking for this book for so long. I eventually had to borrow it from the library, and the library didn't have it, so the library had to borrow it from somewhere else before I could read it. And I did read it, and I was happy with that, but I am far, far more happy that I now own The Drowned World, which is a great book, and which I can now read whenever I like. The chances of me ever letting go of this book are limited. I do need to get rid of the sticker from many, many sellings ago, but that's fine, we can do that. Also, Homer, the Iliad. This is one of those literature ones, or classic non-science fiction classics that I really wanted to get my hand on. And I read Homer when I was way too young, the Iliad. I think I read it when I was about 13, and I couldn't really wrap my head around it. I was simultaneously fascinated and bewildered. I was living in the Mediterranean at that time. Greece wasn't unfamiliar to me, but this much epic poetry was some epic poetry a bit too much. I tried to reread it about, I'm going to say about 15 years ago now, and it wasn't great. I was insulted by the fact that I disliked it as much as I did, but I couldn't stick with it, and I was bored. Now, I later came to realize that the reason for that was probably the translation. I don't know what translation that long ago book was, but I've heard since that different translations do different things. On this occasion, I picked up this beautiful, new, allegedly, I doubt it, translation by Martin Hammond, and I held it up against the older, this one by the way is from 1987, I guess that's new, an older, more traditional copy by someone called Ryu, I think. And I opened them both to the 5th chapter, and I read the first paragraph from both. In this one, it's Diomedes triumphant. Then Pallas Athene imparted strength and courage unto Diomedes, son of Tydeus, so that he should stand out among the Argives and win heroic glory. She set untiring fire blazing from his helmet and shield, like the late summer star which rises from its bath in the ocean to shine brightest of all. Such was the fire she made burn from his head and shoulders, and she spurned him into the eye of the battle, where the fighters swarmed thickest. How good is that? The other edition, however, it sounded kind of like, well, then Athena did some stuff, and she sent him off to fight, and that was it. It was banal. And I suspect that what happened those 15 or so years ago, I picked up one of those translations, and I see their point. I'm not criticizing Ryu or his readers. I see that if you are a student of literature and you need to read the Iliad, you want it to be comprehensible. You want to be able to read all of this as fast as you can so that you can get your assignment in and gain a comprehension of what the stories were actually about. But that's not who I am, and that's not my space in my life. I want stuff that makes me go after I've read it. High hopes that this time the Iliad and I will get along better. Yes. Also in that theme, The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson is a book that I did not have. I had once, but I'm pretty sure it was a kids' edition that had been abridged. A couple of years ago, I tried to reread more literature. I wanted to read a lot of Stevenson. I ended up having to get The Black Arrow out of the library because I just couldn't find it anywhere. And I am a sucker for these little red leather pocket books. They always have these beautiful frontispieces, and they are red, leathery. Okay, I know it's not really leather. And they've got gold embossing. So they're absolutely stunning. I really love them, and I'm happy to have The Black Arrow. Probably in about a year, I'll be ready to reread it, if I'm not sooner. And now I have it, and I can do that without harassing the local libraries. Okay, Australian books. Finishing with The Magic Puddings being The Adventures of Bunyip Bluegum by Norman Lindsay. If you aren't Australian, or maybe English, you may not be aware of Norman Lindsay. He is absolutely iconic. He wrote this book in the early 1900s, I am pretty sure, and he illustrated it himself. There we go. Copyright 1918. And here we see Bunyip Bluegum and his uncle Wattleberry. His illustrations are fantastic throughout. This is a story of Bunyip being a splendid fellow and his uncle having whiskers. It's for small kids, but it's the art is so great and the story is so fun that it could really be for anyone. Anyway, Bunyip decided that he was going to leave home, so he went off adventuring with a walking stick and met various people such as kangaroos and bandicoots, all dressed like English gentlemen, of course, because of 1918. Eventually, Bunyip realised he hadn't taken any food, and so he was hungry. He walked down the road and he came across Barnacle Bill and Sam Sawnoff the penguin. Hello, Raper Cheap. Another piece of Australiana. Eating a pudding on the road. And so begins the magic pudding. Chirp chirp. This particular magic pudding is a pudding that renews itself as much as you eat it. Where are we going with this? As much as you eat it, it will renew itself, and it can be any flavour you want. You just turn the basin or something and you say steak and onions, or, well, what do you want? Attention? Probably. It's a great story. Now, this particular copy I've had since I was 5 or 6. It's torn at the edge there, where when I was staying with a friend, his father decided I wasn't putting down my book fast enough when dinner was declared, and he tried to rip it out of my hands. Scarred me, that did. Wonderful book. And then I saw this one. It's a hardcover. You know, don't love hardcovers. In actual fact, the illustrations are not necessarily better in this one because they were designed to be small, but they are still gorgeous illustrations, and I just love the idea of having the magic pudding as a hardcover. There's Sam about to engage in fisticuffs with the pudding thieves. And in this larger book, I also found out that we have colour illustrations that I don't have in my paperback. So here is the pudding. All from Norman Lindsay's sketches, I believe. He doesn't look very appetizing there. Maybe he's pretending to be a spotted dick. A title for a foodstuff that has always worried me. Colourful illustrations, beautifully done. I couldn't resist the magic pudding. If it had been in the higher quality section, even at $5, I would probably have said no. But for $2.50, I couldn't resist. Okay, so that is the first part of the ongoing book haul from Lifeline Bookfest, December 2025. Thank you for watching. If you're still watching, comment on anything, including my terrible mispronunciations from the Iliad. Remember, I've never actually discussed this with anyone. I've only ever read it with my eyes. I'm probably mispronouncing things. If you've read any of these books, let me know. If you think you'd like to read any of these books, let me know and we'll have a chat. And even if you don't read these books, read other books. Read good books.